all to John, the presentation by Anderson, and I will speak to us about design and resiliency. And I first sort of started to sniff around this one when I saw a report on television about a house being built out in Situ and being built out of Hempcrete blocks. And so I started looking eventually went to that and just wildfire and east side along the gas. That's the architecture plan. And I found very like really sort of this lighting of the lights and checking off a lot of boxes. This exactly is the plan out to come talk to us about how our phases of what it does and maybe get us to start asking these questions about, to our own levels of government about starting to plan a little bit better for how we can thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Dan. I'm going to try and avoid using the mic, so just put your hand up if I'm not talking loud enough that generally people don't have to complain about that with me. Just to give you a little bit more background, I'm fifth generation born in the Nanaimo area, which means that my ancestors were on the second boat of settlers that came to Nanaimo, ironically to mine for coal, which was needed back in England at the time. I am very, very passionate about environment and about moving forward, and my life career has involved going through education in the architectural field, and I branched into urban design and served as a planner. So I have worked for the City and Nanaimo Planning Department, I've worked for the Regional District and Nanaimo Planning Department, and I'm currently a consultant to community groups, to individuals that want to move forward promoting and encouraging sustainable development. My company name, as you can see here, is Green Plan. And my website was hacked, unfortunately. It has crashed, and I'm in the process of building a new one. Thanks to some mischievous person in China, apparently. But not to worry, but keep checking it. I'm just telling you, I'm actually going out to the West Coast this weekend, and part of my objectives is to finish the details on my new website. So that should be coming forward. So I've got about 30 slides to share with you tonight, and then I'm going to follow up with questions and answers. And because there's a shutdown on Highway 4 going to the West Coast that happens at 10 o'clock every night, I got to be out the door at 8:30. So I apologize to anyone that needs to ask me an additional question. I will give you my my email, and I welcome any emails, inquiries that might come out of that. So it's jack@greenplan.ca. I'll give you that later. So as mentioned, I've been working in the area of sustainable planning for many, many years, and I just throw out a couple of different projects that I was involved in just to kind of give you a scope and range. This was an eco-lodge facility in northern Quebec that I was involved in the design of. This is a project in the Cowichan Bay area, which with living green roofs, and it was a brownfield conversion. And then this is a residence, a green residence for a family that's moved out from Alberta to the Nanaimo area. Now, this is what I practice when I'm working with my design, when I'm working with people on buildings, etc. And I highlight all the different, what I call patterns of green, because there's a multitude of elements that all come together in order to make it work for a house, etc. So we explore each one of these in the context of what makes sense for a particular property, and in terms of what we should and could incorporate, what is going to be financially viable in there. And then here's some pictures of some of the projects that I've been involved in. As mentioned, I'm on my way out to the west coast of the island to this wonderful little community called Salmon Beach.
I was the agent and planner that got the zoning amendment in there, and then for many of you that are familiar with it, it is a very highly eco-sensitive area, and so there's a lot of unique aspects that went into that. There's a cabin from up there that was running on photovoltaics. Now, subsequently, hydro has been brought into that community, but I remain off the grid there. That's important for me. This is a residence here on the top. In fact, that's my residence with a passive solar sun space and rooftop gardens at various levels. So we're growing food and stuff on the roof there, and as I tease, we don't have to worry about the deer. Yeah, except on Christmas Eve, we tell our grandkids. So, yeah. Now, this bottom one is a very unique house out in Yellow Point that is net zero, 100%. All their water comes from rainwater harvesting only, and they grow a massive amount of vegetables within their permaculture gardens. So this image will come up a couple of times as I talk about some of the elements in here. But quite honestly, our biggest challenge is this, and it's one that's beyond our individual ability to impact in a positive way. And I can tell you that for 30 years, I have been concerned about how do we get society to change so that we can all enact to move forward to try to prevent climate change to the extent that it is. And it's almost like we're at a point now where we've missed our opportunity to turn it around. Even if we tried to turn it around today, we are going to be hit with problems for future generations, and we have to just accept the fact. So what does that mean to someone like myself? That's a very important question that I raise. So this is the kind of thing that we can expect as a consequence of climate change. We have flooding, we have windstorms like we've never seen on the island. I don't know, I lost power for 4.5 days in Cedar, where I live, in a, which was just remarkable to me. I don't think I'd ever lost it for more than a few hours previously in there. But you can see the impacts of forest fires, of flooding, and what that looks like on our planet. And it's a very scary proposition when you start looking at these years. So I have to ask myself, what's it going to be like in 2050? What are we going to be facing as a society here and elsewhere on this planet by the time we get to 2050? But I guess I really don't need to worry about it, because I'm going to be somewhere around 90 if I'm alive at all. So I'm quite likely to have checked out by then. And, I turn around and say, well, that's the problem for the next generation. Well, guess what? It doesn't quite work like that, because of this, and this, and this, and that, and this little guy, and this one called Jackson. Those are my grandkids. I would do anything to help them and save them in their life today. If we were out camping and a bear charged into our campsite, I would stand up to protect those kids. Why wouldn't I go out of my way to look at what the future means for them? So I ask myself, as somebody who has an awareness that we need to make change, what is important? What can we do? And I start to realize the critical aspect is developing resilience to recognize the challenge associated with the oncoming climate change. Those kids are going to be in their mid-30s. Every one of them will be in their 30s in 2050, in the prime of their life, and they're going to have to deal with what we as a generation have left for them by the nature of overusing and polluting our environment at their expense. I find it horrific. But I'm inspired by this fellow here, Paul Hawken. And I don't know if anybody has read this book. Yeah. It's a fantastic read, because I was extremely depressed when I realized that we're not making change fast enough on this planet. How are we going to be able to move forward? And I read this book, and what Paul Hawken identified, because he's an ecologist that traveled around speaking around the U.S., is that everywhere he went, people came up to him and gave him business cards and said, I'm part of this society, and we're doing this to try and improve our community. And he started collecting all of these business cards, and then he laid them out on tables and realized that there was thousands of organizations working from a groundswell to try to make the change that we need. And the really, really exciting thing about this is that how the largest movement in the world came into being and why no one saw it coming is because it's in here. It's those grandkids of mine, and I'm sure I look across these spaces that you've got family and grandkids that you would like to protect going forward as well. Well, all of us are in that boat, and that's why we're so motivated to do things within our communities to try and make change. And I was so excited to meet Dan and to hear that there was a transition town movement happening in Port Alberni. Fantastic. I'd love to help where I can. So this is another great inspirer for me is Rob Hopkins. I love his writing, I love his humor. And I recognize that there's so much that we can do if we recognize that climate change and peak oil are things that we're going to need to address here in the coming years. And so when I look at this, one of the things that really caught my attention in his writing was, and it sort of comes in this here, peak oil and climate change, the two greatest challenges facing humanity, but that in the future, it could be preferable to the present if we plan sufficiently in advance with imagination and creativity. We were given a gift from the Creator, the ability to be imaginative and to look at our problems and come up with creative solutions to them. So I am so excited by that because this is where we're now beginning to come together as community and find solutions within our own imagination and creativity. So I start to ask myself, how do I move forward as a planner who helps plan communities and as a designer who designs green buildings? And I live in these dual disciplines of architecture and planning. And so I look at it and I think to myself, well, what is going to be coming upon us here with climate change in particular? And the three major ones that they speak about are drought, where we get lack of rain for extended periods of time in places in the prairies or California. That's a horrific challenge for them. Here on this island, and I can say this comfortably, we're all a bunch of Jed Clampetts. We have free water that drops on us all the time. We're so lucky here because we get way more rain than we really want. But we're lucky in that sense. We're not going to face drought on this island to this extent that other places will, but it will be more difficult than it is now, I'm sure. High temperatures, well, we're already seeing that all across there, and it's happening here as well. And the great scare that comes with high temperatures and the lack of rainfall is forest fires. And so we see more and more and more. And one day we're going to stand here looking out into these forests that surround this valley, and there's going to be other areas that are going to be scorched, because that's just going to happen in our world because of what we're creating. So we have to expect that. But that says to me, what do I do with the design of my buildings? Is fireproof an important component? Absolutely. We'll come to that. The third one is storms. Storms are horrific. You know, you look at it down the States, down in Florida and Carolinas and stuff, and they get these hurricanes coming in and wiping out whole towns and stuff in there with massive winds that we see down on that coast. And then we hear that places like Toronto had their 6th and 7th and 8th major snowstorm of the year when they used to have 1 or 2. So people are dealing with the fact that they're inundated with storms. And if your house is blown over, do you take your foundation and build another house and do it all again? Or do you start thinking, maybe I just want to move to some place that doesn't quite get hit the same way that their home does? So I've added number 4 here in terms of climate refugees. And I honestly believe that we're going to have a mass immigration to Vancouver Island as people come to realize that we're very much protected here in comparison to other parts of North America. So to that, I bring up this particular, and I apologize for the resolution of it. I scanned all through the web there to try and find an image that shows it. But the equator runs across the middle here, and by the nature of the rotation of the Earth, it creates a clockwork spin over the oceans. And so the hot weather that comes at the equator comes up the eastern seaboard of North America. And that's why we hear those storms in Florida and Carolina, and they're giving them names like Bob and Jack and Dan, because those are horrific storms. But here on this island, we get a heavy wind. Nobody's calling it Bob or Dan or Jack, because we don't get the level of it. Because the reality is that over here, those storms, which are referred to as typhoons in the Pacific, they go up across Asia, they cool down in the north, and by the time they're coming down through British Columbia, they've slowed right down, and we don't get those storms. We're not getting them to the same extent where we have to put names on the hurricanes. That's very exciting to me, but it also tells me that anybody who understands this basic principle says, I want to move to the west coast of North America. Statistics say that the most desirable place in America is Washington State for people who want to get out of their areas that are very concerning. So they want to come into those areas, the Olympic Peninsula areas, etc. And so likewise, we're going to see the same thing. And as a designer who's open to designing houses for people, I've got all kinds of people retiring from Ontario and across the prairies that are coming to the island. In fact, a couple of years ago, there was a survey that went out to baby boomers, you know, people my age, born between, 46 and 64, I think, is what baby boomers are classified. And they ran that and said, where do you intend to retire? 15% of all the baby boomers across Canada said that they wanted to retire to Vancouver Island. They didn't say British Columbia, they didn't say the Okanagan, they said Vancouver Island. 15% of all the seniors across our country are saying this is where they want to come. They've already been here enough to know that this is an amazing place to live, and we're so lucky to live in this part of the world. So I want to put this down to how do we move forward with resilience? And I think the critical thing is to go back to the common denominators. And the common denominators for me are, what are our basic needs to stay alive? And the first one I put out there is air. We need to be able to breathe. And we're very, very fortunate on here that most of our weather comes off the Pacific, and the air is relatively clean, and we don't really have to deal as they do in places like China, where people are wearing masks just to walk outdoors in that community. That's a scary thing in my mind. So air is one of the necessities that isn't something that we have to plan too hard for because of our lucky spot in the world, but that could change. Shelter. Shelter comes at two levels. The first level of shelter from the elements is the clothing we wear. That protects us. And for those that are homeless, sometimes that's all they've got, and maybe a cardboard box. But the second aspect, of course, is the ability to have a building that you can live in, that you can work in, or where you reside, where you sleep, etc. And so shelter is a critical piece for us moving forward. So I want to talk a little bit more about shelter, because something has happened in the last few years that has me giddy with excitement, okay? First of all, a company has come forward. This is called Just Biofiber. I encourage you all to Google that and learn about this particular building block. So what has happened here is there was a genius who's been in the construction business for his whole life, and he was trying to figure out how can he use the values of hemp and lime to create housing? And how can we do that? Because first of all, combining hemp and lime isn't something that someone just came up with and said, hey, this is a great idea. Hemp and lime are in the Great Wall of China. Hemp and lime are in the pyramids. That combination is always been recognized as valuable. So in a situation like this, what they've done is they've created a structural module for it. So that's what we need when we're talking about the building codes. If we're building with cob or straw bale, it's all about packing it in a way that's going to work, and we have an engineer that stands back and says, yep, that's structurally sound, you can live in that. This is all about building a block that's 21 inches, 10.5 inches wide, 8 inches high, that has an internal composite core that links with the blocks below and above it. So it comes together like Lego. Nothing here is complex in this. It's extremely simplistic. And the other amazing genius component of it is that he came up with the adhesives that hold the block together so it doesn't crumble apart. And there was a lot of work that was required. So those are two patents that were created for this block. Just Biofiber owns the patent rights in North America to this particular design ideal. And in that situation here, the opportunity for this to become a revolution is extremely exciting for me because we can grow it. I'm going to talk a little bit more about this product here. So here's a little bit of a view of what some of the blocks look like. You can see the struts that are the structural core of it. You can see the hemp and lime mix that comes together. There's a scratch coat that goes on it. And the blocks are in various sizes, just like your kids' Legos were when they played with them as well. So we look at that and realize that we can build houses out of these. Now, the Just Biofiber block is amazing in so many different ways. I'm just going to cut through them right now. First of all, they are extremely affordable and easy to build with. You don't need to go to school to learn how to put Lego together or to put Just Biofiber blocks one on top of the other. And you have a special glue that goes in, but the way they seat, they're all perfectly level, etc. within there. Extremely easy to use, and they're at about 10% premium over and above the cost of conventional construction that reaches similar standards for housing. So it's not outrageously expensive, and it's going to get better all the time. Ma'am, I'm going to hold my questions to the end if that's possible, okay? And I'll come right back to the slide if you need it, okay? They are non-toxic materials. All of the stuff that's used here is very organic materials, and it's very, you know, there's no health risks to work with this product in any way. They are exceptionally strong in construction. So a set of blocks can go 8 stories. That's the projection now based on the structure of them. So they are extremely strong in a compression state. They're stronger than concrete in our communities for building. 2 other critical aspects. They are fireproof. They took a wall made out of Just Biofiber, they put a tiger torch against it with a propane bomb, and then they all sat back and said, well, we all know hemp burns, so let's just sit back and time this and see how quickly before the wall bursts into flame. And when they ran out of propane and nothing had changed, they walked over to the wall and realized that with a cloth they could dust off the soot that had formed on the side. And when they put their hand on the back side of it, it was still room temperature. And they went, my goodness, this thing is, and it's now been registered as a completely fireproof building product. So what's critical about this is that in places like California, where wildfires come through and take out whole communities like Paradise, California, this is extremely exciting to them because they're going, we can build our houses out of this with a metal roof, and the fire can come and go, and our house is still going to be there. They are clamoring to get hold of these blocks down in that area. The other thing that's really important to understand is that if you understand construction in multifamily buildings, we need fire walls and we need sound resistance between suites. And therefore, this block lends itself to multifamily development really well. We'll come back to that. It breathes. The block actually allows air to breathe through it, so we don't need to put a plastic vapor barrier around the inside of our house that actually, and then that of course requires us to put a heat recovery ventilator because the air would otherwise be stale. So this is constantly breathing through. That's the nature of this block. And it has an extremely high thermal resistance. So a standard construction these days is a 2x6 frame wall with fiberglass insulation in there, fiberglass bat as they refer to it. that has a factor of about R20. The higher the number, the better. The just biofiber block, based on a 10.5-inch block, is coming in north of R40. And depending on the humidity of the day and the temperature outside, it actually gets even higher. So they ran some tests on a house in Situ that you're going to see a picture of here shortly, that I was very, very fortunate and very much honored to be the designer of that building. And they are discovering R48 at times within this block. So the insulative value actually changes. And get this, the product, because it has lime in it, lime absorbs carbon dioxide. So we have this opportunity to grow industrial hemp. And just to make sure, for those who aren't clear on that, industrial hemp has CBDs in it. It does not have THC, and so we're not talking about the medicinal marijuana or even the recreational marijuana. We're talking about a plant that is that doesn't provide any of those elements, but it has a core in there that we take out called the herd, that is slashed into tiny pieces and then mixed in with the lime, and that is the structure. That's the mix that we have in that. So the piece, the core, has no other use in the marketplace, or very limited in there. Whereas the seed that comes off of it is used for hemp hearts, and many of you, probably like myself, have it in my health shake every morning. I have hemp hearts in there, because it's extremely good for you. The foliage, the leaf that comes off of that leaf, they're actually processing that to make dashboards for BMWs, which is amazing, and it's because of its resilience, elasticity that's built into the molecular structure of it. So that's, you know, another thing. But now we can take the core, which is otherwise just thrown away because there's no real market, and they don't want you to burn it, because then you're just putting all the carbon back up into the atmosphere. So there's apparently mountains of it in Manitoba, because they're going, what do we do with this? And they say, well, compost it. So pile it up and let's just wait, you know, till it all composts down. So here we have a block that offers all of these attributes in order for us to move forward. And it has longevity. It will last, well, as the Great Wall of China has, or the pyramids, what appears to be forever. And the very fact that it's absorbing carbon dioxide with the lime actually is making limestone. So it's actually making your building stronger over time. So they're estimating that a house built out of this is going to last for hundreds of years. How long? You know, real good question. There's the house that I designed. This is the very first house on the planet. It's on a bluff overlooking the Strait of Juan de Fuca and the Olympic Peninsula. It's this house, as you can see, also has a huge array of solar panels. It does rainwater collection. It's got a passive solar sun space for food production within it, and the owners of it are very, what's the right word there? They want to share their what they have. They want people to copy what they did. In fact, when Arno came to me, Arno Koininen, who owned a company that built icebreakers in the Arctic and would sell to the Russian government, the British government, and things like that, he said to me, Jack, he says, it's very, very important to me that you design a house that people can come and see that is going to be fully sustainable, but I don't want anybody to be walking away saying, I would do one of those, Arno, if I had your money. He said, you've got to keep the costs down. Not because I can't afford it, because he certainly could, but it was to make sure that we could do this. So this house of 3,400 square feet was built for less than $1 million, which was his target, and quite often houses in those types of locations can easily exceed that. So I believe that the very nature of this block is something that we can do. Just to give you an example, in my area, which is Area A of the Regional District in Nanaimo, which is Cedar, South Wellington, and Cassidy, 50% of the total land base that's there is in the agricultural land reserve. 80% of all that agricultural land doesn't even have a horse or a cow grazing on it. It is just bare grassland that nobody's doing anything with. And we could be growing hemp, industrial hemp there, which we could then use to create the blocks, which we could then use to build houses. So what are we going to do if we have a mass immigration to this island that says, wow, we all want to live here now, come on, cut down some more trees, we can build houses here. We're going to build a huge demand on our forest systems. And I think that if we get wise and we get started early and we grow industrial hemp and we start making blocks on this island, then this becomes the norm for what we want to do, because it's going to be fireproof, it's going to be resilient, it's going to be able to take earthquakes, and at the same time it's going to be affordable, and it's absorbing carbon dioxide all the time that it's there while it's growing as well. Now in Alberta, they say that you need 10,000 acres of industrial hemp to provide enough hemp to keep the factory building the blocks, and they can build enough blocks for about 30 houses a month. Is what they estimate. The unique aspect of that is that here on the island, because of our climate, we only need 5,000 acres for each plant that we're doing. And the reason for it is that we can actually get 2 rotations of industrial hemp on the same piece of property. Now, if there's any farmers in here, you will know that you can't do that every year because you've got to plant something else in there, or you'll deplete the soils, and we need nitrogen-rich soils for industrial hemp to grow. So I'm excited about what we can do with our farms that don't have any real solid use, because we could all be growing industrial hemp, and we could be selling the seed, and we could be selling the CBDs to the health industry, and we could be selling the herd to Just Vinyl Fiber, and we could be selling the leaf, which by the way is apparently extremely rich in protein, which in places like Holland, all of their cattle eat that, and they have this massive dairy industry based on industrial hemp. And only just recently, I think in the last month, the Canadian government actually passed a law that says that you can feed industrial hemp to cattle, because it was actually prohibited at some point. So that's just changed. So I'm looking at this and the ability to produce industrial hemp as an opportunity to actually give us our forest industry and maintain the sustainability of our forest industry, and so many of us depend on it. Okay, so another basic need that we have is energy. Okay, we've talked about air, we talked about shelter. The third one here I'm bringing up is energy. So one of the critical things is that if we use buildings that are super insulated, so instead of being R20, we're now talking somewhere between R40 and R50 in there, then the amount of heating that we actually need inside that building is dramatically reduced, because it's not going to lose heat all that quickly in there anymore. So as a consequence of that, the reduced heating requirements in there, it improves the financial viability for renewable energy. So in a situation like that, we can now begin to explore the ideas of photovoltaics and passive solar as a means of meeting our heating requirements in there, instead of going to energy intensive or electrical power for heat pumps or what else we might want to consider using. So it's really interesting that our first area on energy is about conserving. So if we're conserving our energy, then the sources become that much more viable that much sooner. And right now, photovoltaics is very marginally viable today on this island. And every year, the cost of photovoltaics comes down, each panel comes down a little bit more and a little bit more, and the efficiency of the panel gets better. So like 3 years ago, I put 9 panels on the roof of my office. They are 235 watt panels. Now, the going standard is 340 watts, and they're cheaper than what I paid for the 235s. So technically, I could put 6 of the new ones up there to give me all the energy that 9 are already doing. So we have this ability to start recognizing that photovoltaic power can really help us moving forward, drawing the energy from the sun and creating electricity out of it. So the other critical piece to that is how do we store the energy? So the first thing is that if we sell it back to the grid, okay, which is supported by BC Hydro under what's called their net metering program, then the meter turns backwards when we're sending electricity to them. And then when we use electricity at night, because we're not getting any power from our solar panels, then the meter goes the other way. And if over the course of the year it's gone backwards more than it's gone forward, then you are classified as net zero in the world of energy. And BC Hydro would have written you a check. And you might have heard that correctly, would have written you a check, because in the last year they decided that they're going to change their policy, and if you are negative, then you don't owe them anything and they don't owe you anything, and you don't actually get that credit. But the people that owned the previous house there, you might have saw the photovoltaics in the garden, the first year they paid $58 for their electrical for their entire year. They have a big house there. $58 was their entire electrical bill. The second year they got a check for $250. So the reason is that they had learned how to conserve energy, because it all comes down to our lifestyle. There's no value in having a super insulated house if your kids leave the doors wide open every time they run outside. You know, it's not going to work. You have to learn to conserve. That's your first step in any effort to be conserving. So I know here the grid tie thing is a BC Hydro one, but the other thing that's happening is the research and development on this planet into battery storage systems. And so the problem is that if you are a grid tie, and we have a power outage because we've had a big windstorm, then you're kind of hooped. You don't have any despite the fact you've got solar panels on the roof, unless you've got special connections in there, you might have some juice during the day, but you don't have really anything when it comes to at night. You're in the same boat as everybody else that's connected to the grid. So in a situation like that, it starts to say, let's do battery storage systems. And the reason I throw this picture up here is this is the cabin up at Salmon Beach where I'm going to tonight, okay? In this shed over here on the left, you see 4 solar panels on there. There's a bank of batteries. They're about this high, and they're about from me to the piano. And that bank of batteries gives us all the electricity to run 2 cabins side by each in there, because when I was the agent for that, I recognized the economies of scale within community, and so we got an allowance that multiple owners could share in the common energy system so that the costs would be reduced in the process of it. So those 4 solar panels, an inverter, and a battery bank in there are running all the needs within there, which includes electric refrigerators, my laptop, which I sit there designing houses on and stuff all weekend long while I'm looking out at the eagles and the whales and stuff off of that. And so we have all the basic necessities and comforts of home there, but we live conservative. You know, our lighting is LED lighting, you know, maybe a fluorescent from time to time, but we don't have anything that would be otherwise extremely consuming. We don't use hair dryers out there, and we don't use toasters. I still toast, but I do that over a burner with like a camp stove style. So there are, you know, we're not hurting in terms of our basic necessities out there. But it's really important to recognize here that there are other forms of energy that are happening. And so I don't know how many of you have an iPad or iPhone or something like that, or an Android. There's an app out there called Flipboard. Flipboard is like a personal magazine, and you basically highlight those areas that are of interest to you. And so green living, renewable energy, solar power, all of those things are highlighted for me. So I sit there, and this grabs all these articles from around the world, you know, transfers them into there. And so each day I'm going, oh wow, well look what came out in the Huffington Post. And I start reading all these different articles and stuff like that. Well, just the other day, there's a new study that has just confirmed the ability to use solar power, the sun, to take seawater and split it into oxygen and hydrogen. and then hydrogen becomes an opportunity for fuel. So there are new things being discovered all the time that involve renewable energy. And if anyone understands a little bit about hydrogen, the burning of hydrogen produces water vapor. It doesn't produce carbon dioxide, so it's not a pollutant. So there's a huge opportunity for shift here. Water. Water is the next piece that we have to be sensitive to. And as I said, we're all a bunch of Jed Clampetts here in the sense that we have this free, accessible rainwater. And so I look at that and say, how do we do this? Well, the first thing you do, just like energy, you start with conservation. So you can't have a teenager that goes in for a 20-minute shower when you're trying to conserve water, because they're going to go through all of your water supply in no time at all. So you start to think about it. Down in California, because water is so precious down there, they have invented programmable shower heads. So you come in, you punch in your number, and then you go in, you get a quick blast, okay? Then it stops for 2 minutes while you soap and lather yourself up, and then you get a rinse. And then it stops for a minute, and you can finish up, and then, you know, you can do your hair or whatever you need to do. And you can program this. And at the end of the day, you've used about a third of the amount of water that you would have if you just cranked it on and stood around there and did your usual shower routine. So there are all kinds of conservation strategies for water that's very important, not just your low-flow toilets and your faucets and stuff, which can use more of a mist instead of a spray so that you can reduce your water. So we start with conservation and we look at reuse. We take our shower water, we run it through a series of filters. We can then bring it back into our toilet and flush our toilets with it. That's called gray water reuse options, and that can save us 30% of our water as well. So then once we have reduced our volumes and we're reusing as much as we can, we then look at where can we get our water supply from, and rainwater harvesting is a huge opportunity, especially in this part of the world. So I have been involved in a community development using the weather patterns that are there. We have been able to determine that we need 600 square feet of roof for every person to meet 100% of their water needs in a year. And I'm sure for all of you that know what November is like on this island, we get enough rain in November alone that if it didn't rain for the other 11 months, we could meet all of our water needs as a person through that just from November. But of course you'd have to have a massive cistern, because the size of the cistern that stores this water is all based on what is the longest period of drought and what is the volumes of water that you're using on a daily basis. And that's how we determine the size of a cistern. So that house that I showed, and actually I think it comes up here again, it's got two 10,000 gallon cisterns, concrete cisterns, under the floor of the garage where they park their vehicles. And they don't use any other water on that property. That's the one that's net zero. Now, in addition to this, we need to look at purification, because if you're taking rainwater, you can't just drink it. You still have to go through a process to make sure it meets Canadian drinking water standards. But there's all kinds of technologies out there that we can work with, including some that do not require massive amounts of electricity, such as ceramic-based ones. And the cabin that you saw earlier, it has exactly that. Rainwater run through that becomes drinking water. So, and then, and this is really important to me, because I have a development that I've been working on for a zoning amendment, and the municipality said, whoa, Jack, we really like what you're doing, and we're happy to give you the density you want there, but we want you to connect to the community water system. And the community water system has a moratorium. They can't add any more, so the whole project is dead in the water, because the planners are frightened that we couldn't do it all with rainwater harvesting in case there was a bit of a drought. So meanwhile, these guys down in the States, called Zero Mass Water, they've come up with a technology where that solar panel sitting in the sun produces 5 liters of drinkable water every day. Between 4 and 5 liters. So now we have solar panels. If we take some of our solar panels that are PV and we actually put them there, we could guarantee in the middle of a drought that we've got 4 to 5 liters of fresh drinking water for our families that are there. It may not meet all our requirements for showers or irrigating our gardens, but it would be valuable to give us certainty for our water supply. So that's a very exciting development that I see coming forward. And this is just an example of a project that I'm involved in. And it was more to show you how the cistern sits underneath the floor of the building. And the critical piece with that is that many of you are familiar with cisterns as these big plastic things that sit in the backyard. And to be quite honest, they are ugly. You know, they're not an aesthetic appeal to anything that we look at, and we can put lattice around them and grow vines all over them, try and disguise them. But I look at it from the point of view is we've got to put a foundation under our buildings anyway. And if we locate the walls of our cistern in such a location that they can carry the floor and roof loads going all the way up on the building, then we're already paying for foundation. Why not enclose it and make it so it's a cistern in itself? The Gulf Islands have been doing that for eons. Food becomes one of the other necessities that we can explore. And so right away, when I look at the idea that if we're going to have a conserving residence, then we can use passive solar gain. Passive solar gain is when the sun comes in through the windows and it heats up that space. So in many situations, that heat that's coming in here, we now turn and say, well, what are we going to use that space for? Do we want it to be our living room so that in the heat of the summer it's stifling? Or do we isolate it? We do what's called isolated gain. We create a sun space, such as down in here, where you see lots of glass per volume area there, that they have, the heat comes in here, they take that heat and they distribute it through their house, and it reduces the requirements for what they're going to pay for in terms of energy. In a situation like that, this, by the way, is the house that has the two cisterns under this garage here, 10,000 gallons each. But in that circumstance, if we're going to have a sun space, why not grow food in it? And we can do that by starting our plants in late February or March, so that by the time the last frost hits, we have all kinds of plants that are this high we can put into our gardens, and sometimes we might even get 2 rotations out of a particular plot. So we can grow a lot of our own food in a situation like that. Now within those sun spaces, we can also explore hydroponics or even aquaponics. And that is all about this type of structure in here where you're running water through there. Aquaponics is really exciting because this is where they take water tanks that have something like a tilapia in it, and then the tilapia, being a South American fish that's very resilient to temperature changes, so the sun's shining on it, warms up, and it cools down. The stress is not difficult for the tilapia. But the effluent, the fact that they're pooping in that water, and then that water is being flushed over the gardens, they see these amazing yields coming out of it when they go fresh water versus tilapia water. So this has been known since the 1960s, and in fact, that was part of my education when I was going to university about that. So aquaponics becomes a really exciting opportunity to tie into our food production in there. And then the other aspect is permaculture gardens, and I'm sure many of you would be familiar with the permaculture movement because it's a big part of what Rob Hopkins is building the Transition Town movement around as well, is understanding that permaculture is looking at nature, observing nature, understanding how it works in perfect harmony, and then having humans mimic that in our own creation of habitat. So these gardens here, running on rainwater only, are producing 5,000 pounds worth of vegetables for that family. In fact, way more than they can, so they're selling it at a local farmer's market or giving it away. So we have the ability to grow much of our own food. However, you know, if we want papayas or bananas that don't grow here as much, so we might have to trade some things that we do grow for that. So then there's waste. Waste becomes another necessity that we have to look after. What's exciting in there is that we all know the value of composting our organics so that we can put them back into the garden and maintain the nutrients in our soils. Recycling, of course, is critical where we can, if we can do it in these scales. And then the fact is that what's neat is that Island Health got out of the septic business about 20 years ago, and they now allow what we call a rope so it's a person that's taken a course that understands how septic, to come up with their own creative solution for handling septic on a property. And now they're using many more different pressurized systems and exploring a variety of different alternatives, because as long as someone's willing to stamp and sign it and take liability for it, the local government steps back and says, oh, okay, all right, well, that's what they say is going to work, then it's going to work, and if it doesn't, then you go after them, you know, so the municipality doesn't get too concerned about it. So innovative septic systems are improving our opportunities within our own plots of land in terms of how we handle our septic. When we get to a larger scale, we can get into things like solar aquatics or a biodigester. And what's unique about that is that the biodigester is a project that I was involved in where we looked at that as a community scale. And coming out of that, we have 3 unique products. So instead of looking at our septic as waste, something to get rid of, flush it out to the ocean, let's get rid of it, it's all about how can we reuse this stuff. And so the 3 products that come out of it are a nutrient-rich fluid, which we can pump underground under fruit and nut trees, and we get amazing yields coming out of it because it's nutrient rich. We also end up with a sludge that can be mixed in with other compostable materials and becomes usable in gardens and such as well. And then the third is it creates a methane gas, and the methane gas can be used to burn off and create heat to help heat buildings and other things. And I can share some exciting stories there where we discovered how the heat allowed us to heat the water that was in a cistern, and then our geothermal expert said, well, if you're heating the water, then I can pull that heat out of there and I can distribute it to heat all the houses in our community without worrying about freezing the cistern, because it's going to continually getting heat from the septic. 3 kids, 3 adults realized this, all in their own specialty areas, at a conference I was at, and it was like 3 kids under a Christmas tree when they realized that, hey, my system works with your system, and it works with this system, and all 3 of them went, like, this is amazing, you know, and so we look to incorporate that. So I tend to believe that there is still one more basic human need. And I don't know if many of you have ever watched that show that they put on sometimes called Alone. And it's where they isolate a bunch of people at the north end of Vancouver Island, and they have to live in harmony with nature and survive. And they've only got X number of various implements to work with. And so you've got people out there that have figured out how to make these amazing shelters and how to create a food supply, and everybody looks comfortable. And the guy hits the button and says, no, take me home. I can't stand it any longer. Because that's what it is. It's alone. They're in isolation. And as human beings, we need companionship as much as we need air and as much as we need water and food. And so companionship to me is a critical piece in all of this. You know, we can go out and become a hermit way off in the wilderness and try and survive. But it's going to drive us crazy internally because we like to be social. So companionship is a very, very important thing. And then that leads to me, instead of all of these houses that I've designed, and I can tell you that I've designed about 500 homes since I designed my first passive solar house in 1985, is many of these are in isolation. They're in neighborhoods or in rural pieces of property. But what really people are looking for is green neighborhoods, the opportunity for everybody to live together and to share in the common goal of what's in that neighborhood. And so in that context, I bring up what's called economies of scale. And so when you allow people to move together and all live within one community, and you share in that, depending on your ownership structure of that, then you can meet a great variety of needs at way less cost. So to give you an example, in one development I was involved in, a green neighborhood, we knew that a geothermal system, which is drawing the heat out of the ground and bringing it in and heating our house, costs about $40,000 on average for a typical house. We have a cluster of 7 homes. We could put in one system and we could feed all 7 of those homes. And we were then told that our cost was going to come in at between $12,000 and $14,000 per each house. That's where economies of scale start to make sense when you talk about green neighborhoods. Never mind the fact that you've got companionship when you're growing food in the gardens, and when you are collecting all of your compostables or your recycling that you need to do. You're doing it at a scale at the level of a neighborhood. And so I really think that the next critical step in our communities is to create green neighborhoods that allow people to live with common values and to work together. And if some of the studies suggest that an optimum number of persons in a community or a green neighborhood would be about 150 persons, which based on 2.5 persons per household, which is a typical average in the planning world, that's about 60 homes that would share in common ownership of land and be able to meet all the basic needs within that. So here's a couple of examples of some green neighborhoods. This is a green neighborhood in Cedar that I'm working on that is it's been parked for a little bit because the owner has some health issues and we're looking for a new owner to move forward with it. But in this situation, this area in the middle here, it says fruit and nut tree orchard. That's the biodigester. That's where all the effluent was going underneath. So instead of having this great big reserved septic field, we have a fruit and nut orchard that is being powered by human poop in there, or human waste within that. We created one-way loops in here, so we minimize the size of the roads. We look at attached housing. There are 21 building sites in here, but this is intended to house about 35 homes in total within there. This is just one project that I'm involved in. Here's another one that is a little bit more recent, and it's currently in a zoning amendment in the Cowichan Valley, municipality of North Cowichan. And in this situation, what we did is we isolated the vehicles into a common area. I don't know if many of you are familiar with Duncan, but there used to be an amazing inn on Maple Bay Road called the Quamachan Inn. In 2016, it burnt to the ground. It was just a beautiful, spectacular place. And so we're now trying to keep the heritage and unique value of this community by creating something here. And I apologize, I realized that my graphic that I threw in here last night, I picked the wrong one because the trees shouldn't be square. They should be round. Yeah. So there's some issues there. But what we've created here is what's called a greenway or a green street. So people are living across one another from an area that is just planted. The automobile is given a secondary role within our community, and in this situation, it's parked in the center. But I was a bit concerned about giving up that much land area when we need gardens. And so this shows you the image there. We're looking at the top of that parking structure to be community gardens where we're growing as much of our food as we can within a permaculture intensive gardening structure. And then this is the green street, if you will, or the greenway that runs through, where all of your neighbors are out in the front on their porches conversing with the people that are in the streets, and everybody has the opportunity to create a snack track. So you've got blueberries and other fruits and vegetables all along the edge of the greenway, so you always have opportunities to feast and forage within there. So in summary, I say that for the sake of our grandchildren's future, that if we use our divine gift of creativity and imagination to create resilient communities, focusing on meeting all of our basic needs with existing and emerging technologies, we should be able to approach both individual and neighborhood scale self-reliance today on this island. And I'm very, very optimistic for where that's going to go. And as I said, I won't be here in 2050. If I am, I'm not sure that this part will still be working. But those grandkids I showed you pictures of, they're dear to me, and I want them to be able to survive this future here as well. So this is my thank you for your interest, your time, and I hope that I've planted a seed for you all to move forward. So thank you very much, and I am open to questions. Okay, and it appears I've got about 18 minutes, so I'm sorry. Oh, I got half an hour.
Half an hour, yeah.
Yeah, I've got half an hour, that's what I hope.
So my question was,
Yes.
if those blocks, they can be in an arch or dome shape, or do they have to be more linear?
They can be cut as a curve, okay? They can be cut in curves, the ability to round them across the top would be somewhat wasteful because of the way that they are built into structure. When I designed the Koinen residence, the opportunity to consider these blocks wasn't there at that time. But I went to the owners of Just Biofiber. I said, I have the project that will help to launch what you are trying to do here. They came on board. I had an internal sun space in there with a curved wall. And I thought, oh, okay, well, we'll have to just modify that when we get to putting in the Just Biofiber. I went down there and the wall is curved. You know, so they cut each block as a segment and then lined them all up, stacked them all up, and they have a curved wall on the Just Biofiber.
That's more wind protection, like when it's not, it won't, it'd be stronger, wouldn't it, that round shape?
Yeah, it could very well, but for the most part, these are extremely strong just by the nature of the way that they overlap and they glue together. I know that they did a shaker test where they built a little building and put it on a platform and then said, okay, hit Richter scale 7.5, give this thing a shake. So they did that. What happened was the concrete foundation that was around the base of it cracked and actually fell away, and the blocks bridged it. So the glue and the internal struts, the way they connect in there, were so strong, they actually helped support the building even though the foundation fell away on it. Yes, sir.
So what are those green parts made out of?
Okay, that is a composite material that would be similar in many ways to fiberglass. Now, my understanding is it's 95% natural materials. There's 5% in there right now that would be part of a petroleum mix. But what they're doing is they're actually experimenting with hemp resin as a means to offset even that 5%, so that there will be absolutely nothing that is oil-based. So these are plant-based composite material that it's created out of. Any more questions? Yes, ma'am.
I'm curious about the cisterns, the underground cisterns. Are those made of concrete?
That is the common route to go with them, and they're done in part because, as I mentioned, we have to put foundation in the ground. If we use concrete for that, then when we come down, it gives us the strength for our foundation because that's what's accepted in the BC Building Code. And we put what's called Zypex into the concrete itself when we make the mix. And the Zypex basically waterproofs the cistern so that it can't leak. In fact, Zypex is really quite interesting because if you had an earthquake and you got a crack in your cistern, the Zypex would actually flow into that crack and then reseal that crack for you.
That's what I was wondering. And
Yeah.
how do you spell that?
Zypex. I think it's Zypex.
Okay.
But it's a common additive in the concrete world. Now, I can tell you that the Just Biofiber block made out of hemp and lime isn't good underground. In fact, it'll deteriorate over there. Whereas the block itself is insect resistant, and mice and rats and stuff have no interest in it at all because of the lime in there. So there's some interesting aspects about that. So what happened is that they went back and said, well, if we can't put Just Biofiber blocks underground, what can we do? And so they started experimenting with soy-based blocks, which makes almost like a foam type structure. And they're now using them below grade because you can backfill over that. So the company that's created these blocks is now looking at foundation blocks out of it, as well as floor and roof membranes, which is really amazing because of the nature of how the block works. Because you don't need a header over a 16-foot garage door. It's just 2 layers of blocks bolted into one another, and it works like a header in there. Other question?
Sorry, yeah, one last one. If you're doing a tiny house on wheels, is it possible or has it been done with these?
I haven't heard of one done with them, but remember, there's only been one house on the planet that's ever been built out of it. That's the one in Souk.
Okay.
That said, there is a shop that's been built in Saanich, and they're going to be building a house this summer. There's another one happening in the Gulf Islands. So the only hesitation to just biofiber is there's only one factory on the planet, and there's a massive number of people lining up to say, hey, where do I get in the queue? So I'm working with some people designing a house right now, and they got in the queue. They will be getting their blocks in April 2020, but that was their original target anyway. Yes, sir.
What about moisture retention in the blocks?
The moisture gravitates right through the block, which is really quite a unique element in that. So that's why it doesn't need a vapor barrier. And what's interesting is that that's been known for eons in places like England, where the use of hemp and lime or hemp and any other, or pardon me, lime and other mixtures in there have done that because of the breathability of it. So the moisture actually gravitates through the wall. So for instance, the outside of the block, you put a lime-based stucco on it, so it repels the water off of it. On the inside, you put a lime-based plaster, and then that allows it to breathe. So if you said, I don't particularly like the look of stucco on the outside, you can put rain screen, which is vertical slats, against that, screw them in, and then you could put hardy plank or cedar siding or anything else you wanted, as long as you leave that gap, because that's important for the breathing of the wall itself.
So that'll prevent mold and that kind of stuff.
That's right. There has been no sign of mold in any situation there. I can tell you that just for fun, they built themselves a wall out of some of the first blocks they had outside of the factory, their first location where they had it, and they just put it out there and said, well, let's see what the elements do. Let it rain on it, and let the critters come by and pee on it or whatever else, and see what would happen over time. And they say that not only is it still fully intact, it hasn't even swollen a millimeter in that time. So it holds its shape extremely well in that sense too. Yes, sir.
So, are there any regulations against growing commercial hemp in this area?
No, and I can tell you that where I met Dan actually was down in the Vancouver Island Agricultural Fair, because part of this presentation came from that. And in fact, if I zip down through this a ways, I can show you some of the stuff from that other presentation I did about the Just Biofiber. And so it's regulated by Health Canada. It prefers cooler and drier conditions. It needs nitrogen-rich soils. So therefore it's really good with legume and lentil rotations. It's fast growing and therefore has a very high biomass yield in there. And it's a multi-purpose crop for grain and fiber. And then this shows you the marketplace for the industrial hemp products that come out of it. So there is a significant market. There are, at this point, 80 acres of Vancouver Island farm that is in industrial hemp, according to a fellow that has been trying to push and promote that for about 15 years. So my belief is that if we can make people understand that this becomes an alternative building product for us, that we could increase those numbers dramatically. And as I mentioned, we only need 5,000 acres in industrial hemp in order to meet the requirements to actually start manufacturing Just Biofiber blocks for the construction industry.
Does it just need an average amount of water like growing any other crop?
Very, more or less, and I'm not going to tell you that I'm a farming expert on that, but the people that I've spoken to said that it isn't exceptionally, water, there isn't a massive amount of water required in order for that to grow. It's one of the reasons that hemp is considered a weed. It tends to grow very easily without much attention in that. Here's some of the other stuff that came out of that particular portion of the presentation.
It seems to have been hearing about industrial hemp for years. There always seems to have been this resistance.
So let's go back historically. When Henry Ford built his first automobile, he said, I'm going to build these automobiles out of hemp, was his goal. That scared the poop out of the steel industry in the US. So the steel industry went after the government and said that, and they were accompanied by the cotton industry, which was extremely spooked by the idea that hemp was going to replace cotton as a cheaper go-to product for clothing and stuff. And we all hear about sacks and jeans and shirts and stuff that are made out of industrial hemp. So what happened was, down in the States, the government said, oh, hemp? Hold it, just a minute, that's a drug. So they passed a law that outlawed the growing of industrial hemp, or any kind of species related to marijuana within the States. So up until 14 months ago, it was illegal to grow industrial hemp in the US. They have now opened that market up, to great surprise, considering who the president is down there right now. But, you know, so I can tell you that there has been massive resistance and a lot of misinformation that has been spread about it, but that there is a huge market, and it is across the prairies growing in large volumes. But even things like the ability to use the hemp leaf and feed it to cattle was illegal up until a couple of months ago in Canada. You know, and then they said, oh, well, I guess we can do that too. You know, they're learning so much about certain plants that were lobbied to become illegal, that they weren't, you know, given that. I mean, even the CBDs that are available in the seed as a health element, that is being researched all over the planet. And there's massive discoveries with CBD, including young children with epilepsy that were having seizures, you know, 3 or 4 an hour. And then they took CBD, and everyone stood back and said, hey, you're not having any seizures anymore. You know, and they're realizing that it has almost miraculous health benefits for certain types of challenges. The CBD is being studied in Israel as a solution to Alzheimer's and dementia in there. And so in experiments, they've got 70-year-old guys smoking pot out of, you know, pipes and stuff like that. And they're saying, I couldn't remember stuff, you know, this time last year. Now I can remember it again. You know, there's all kinds of really unique discoveries in CBD. Sorry, it's a long-winded answer to your
No,
question.
that's good. I was kind of always hoping that we would turn into a hemp town. And, you know, I don't know anything about it, but, you know, just fantasizing about turning our pulp and paper mill into a hemp-producing paper mill at least, or something.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's being done or if it's possible. Or,
You know, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a real good question. It's the kind of thing that we want to experiment with. You know, I look at these green neighborhoods. I was showing you how we take the human waste and we pump it underground through underground irrigation, and we're growing fruit and nut trees on there. What if we did that underneath hemp?
Yeah.
Would we even improve the yields that much more? That
Yeah.
we could get, you know, even taller and more biomass?
save the money on that huge septic price tag out there and grow hemp at the same time. Yeah.
Any more questions there? Okay, I'm going to throw one more question at
So
you
where
guys.
is the factory?
Yeah, that's.
Where's the factory? Energey, Alberta.
Oh, it's in Energey.
Energey, Alberta. And the reason that it's there is because it's close to where the hemp farmer is, that they have the contract to provide hemp for in perpetuity. And that's why, as they said to me, you grow hemp on the island, we will build a factory here. So my question to you people, okay, as people who go to various planning events, and I know Dan tried to reach out to see if we could get representatives of the local municipality or even the regional district, is that what can you guys do? I can tell you that Kirkstone project that was in there, that came out of an official community plan. Official community plans are where communities come together, and they work with the local government to come up with a vision of where they want their community to be in a number of years. And so The one that was done in electoral area A, I know, I volunteered for that committee, and there was 50 meetings, that's 50, not 15, over 3 years. It was a massive long one, but we created the most sustainable official community plan that had ever been put together in the regional district, and I was proud to be part of that. One of the things was we opened it up to developers, and some of the developers came in and said, oh, hey, I want to take this whole area, I'll give you a little bit of park over here, and let me just create this whole mass of houses. We gave them the thumbs down. But one fellow came in and said, I'd like to take 8.5 acres and create a green neighborhood. And we said, oh, really? So we actually wrote into the official community plan that this needs to be a model sustainable development, a model sustainable neighborhood. And so that's the way it's written in the OCP, and the developer is going, well, let's just scrap all that green stuff and I'll just flip it. You know, the municipality says, no, the only reason you get this density on this land is because you're prepared to create a model sustainable neighborhood. As it turned out, it was after the OCP had been adopted that the owner of the property had recognized through my speaking at the OCP meetings that he needed to talk to me and see if I could help him through the planning stage of it. So it is a project that I've been associated with ever since. But that's how it came, was in an OCP. And so you people need to go to your community gatherings around OCP and say, we need to create, we need to designate areas for green neighborhoods. And you need to argue about the economies of scale. And I will tell you that if you create them and people have an opportunity to see them, attitudes will change dramatically, extremely quick. And I don't know what time this is, because otherwise I'll give you about 5 minutes.
Quarter after.
A couple more minutes here.
So that place on where the old high school was, what's
Yeah.
happening with that? Is there gonna be a green space thing?
Green space, houses.
Just houses and an
There are no
apartment.
strictures on it. I think it's safe to say that an OCD is something that people write here, put on the shelf and ignore.
And it shouldn't be.
No,
Because
no.
ultimately, if you have progressive thinking people, and if you're involved in the transition movement, then I already know that you guys are progressive by the nature of the fact that you understand and recognize the importance of that. But what I wanted to say to you is that I can stand here and I can tell you all kinds of things, and it sounds all lovely and wonderful, and a week from now you'll have a hard time remembering what we were talking about. But how do we truly change attitudes? And I want to share a little story, because it is who I am and why I am here today. When I was in undergraduate school, I was in an architecture program based on environmentally focused architecture. And so I remember this one day in particular, there's 120 of us in the class. We all walked into the auditorium, and the professor stood up there and he said, I'm going to show you a video today that's going to change your life. Okay, this is 1975, 76, so now I'm dating myself as to when I was going to university, but so be it. That's where I was, and I remember sitting down in there and going, okay, you know, let's bring it on. What video is this? It was a video put together by the Club of Rome, which was a group out of MIT that was studying the impact of humans on the planet. Okay, and they were basically, their video was called Limits to Growth, because they were identifying the fact that if we continued to pollute the environment, it would eventually impact humans that lived on this planet. And so they showed all these heavy heavy doomsday imagery, industrial images of pollution. Acid rain was huge in the Great Lakes at that time. And it was all done with heavy organ music, and it was extremely depressing. And I remember as a kid growing up on Vancouver Island, who thought the world was only pristine, that I walked out of that auditorium and I was just shaking. I was just like, and I walked up to two of my buddies and I said, what are we going to do? And they said, we're going to go to the pub. You know, and I said, no, I'm talking about that movie. And they said, forget it, don't worry about it, Jack, come on. And I'm going like, what? How do you do that? So years later, I'm in a graduate program now at York University, and I'm taking a course called Attitude Change, Social Change. The area of concentration, because it was a catch-all master's program I was in, I was studying ecological community design. in 1980. That's where my headspace was. How do we create communities that are ecologically sound? That was what I wanted to study, and so attitude change was really important. And so anyway, at the end of this course on attitude change, social change, the professor said, you need to do a term paper here and explore attitudes. And so I had flashback to this video, The Limits to Growth. I got access to a high school class in downtown Toronto, grade 11 class. I came in, all these grade 11s, and I said, okay, here you go. I'm going to give you all this quiz. Everybody gets an A, because it's only your opinion. Whatever your opinion is right now is right. So everybody gets an A on this quiz, so you can fill it out as you feel. Okay, and there was 20 questions on there saying, and there were statements about whether climate would ever impact our lifestyle, was acid rain something to be concerned about, was living in the country better than living in the city. You know, there's a variety of these questions that I put in there, but a lot of them were all about climate change and the impact of it. And so I got them to fill it out, and I said, okay, let me collect all of your things, and I put it down and said, okay guys, we're going to get to watch a video. Well, a big cheer went up, because grade 11s, you know how they are. If you can watch a video, it's a lot easier than listening to some old guy like me. I wasn't even old then. But anyway, they said, okay, so I showed them the Limits to Growth video with the heavy organ music and the doomsday imagery, and there was computer projections in that video that showed the population going up to 2030 and then boom, crashing on the planet. You know, and then they'd say, okay, but if we change this variable, we'd make it to about 2035 before we hit these crashes. And so they started showing all of this. It was extremely scary stuff for someone in grade 11 kind of thing, right? So I said, okay, movie's over. I'm going to give you another blank copy of the exact same questionnaire, and I want you to fill it out. And so the students did. And I took them back to my apartment, and I looked at them, and set A and set B were virtually identical. There had been absolutely no movement in their attitudes by watching that video. And I went, that's exactly what happened to my two buddies that wanted to go to the pub. It went in one ear and out the other. It didn't mean anything to them. And I thought, why is that? So then I went back 2 weeks later, and under control, which is what you need to do scientifically, I said, okay, you guys have had 2 weeks to think about it. Here's copy C, the exact same questionnaire. Fill it out. Tell me how you think, because you've had 2 weeks to sleep over that video I showed you 2 weeks ago. So they did, and A, B, and C looked identical. There had been no shift in attitudes from the first one to where I was there. And I said, okay, I'm going to show you another video. I got a round of booze. I got a bunch of kids yelling at me saying, we don't want to see any more of your videos. And I said, well, you'll like this one. It was a video by the New Alchemists, and this was a group that were living in Cape Cod, an intentional community that was living a fully sustainable lifestyle, where they had greenhouses off the backs of their houses that they used the heat from the greenhouses to heat their homes. They grew all their food in there. They had tilapia swimming in their tanks. They flooded the water from the tilapia over their gardens. They were getting amazing yields. They had wind power and solar power. All of that was happening, and this was in the 1960s, 1970s. And then as the credits to the video is going, you can see members of the community skinny dipping in the local creek. And that's going through. And so I said to the kids, okay, you've now seen another video. I'm going to give you the questionnaire one more time. Radical shift in their attitudes on that questionnaire. And so what happened there? What's going on? Why did that shift? Because what happens is that psychologically, we have a defense mechanism. If somebody tells you that something is horrific is going to happen to you, and you don't have any ability to control that, then you do one of two things. You either become exceptionally depressed, or you repress that information as if it doesn't exist. Joanna Macy studied that when there was the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis, because Americans were basically walking down Main Street with someone holding a gun to their head in Russia that could push a button at any point and finish them off. But they didn't think about that because they repressed that information. But when you show them the vision of the positive alternative, it changes everything. So I understood from that experiment, that my career was not going to be standing on a soapbox in the park, waving my hands in the air and say, come on people, we got to change, this is bad. It's all about creating The examples of the positive alternative that people can go in, walk through and say, wow, this is amazing, I could live in one of these. So I believe that for every green neighborhood that we create in each community, it will springboard 5 more.
Yeah, it's
And they will be an exponential movement in that direction.
modeling instead of lecturing.
Right. Show people what can be done. And that's what I've committed myself to. The Eco Village at Shawnigan Lake, I don't know how many are familiar with it down there. I was the agent that got the zoning amendment in there. When we did, we were before the council there, and the council's going, Eco Village, what's that? And they're all looking at one another, I wonder what they're gonna grow, you know, and they're carrying on and stuff like that. And I said, I said, if you're prepared, I mean, an Eco Village is all about an intentional group of people where the gel, the glue that keeps the community together is their passion to live sustainably. And they said, oh, we wrote sustainability into our OCP. Yeah, we'll support that. And I said, well, if you're going to support that, then you need to hear the story. And I told them the story of the high school students in Toronto. And I said, if you're going to allow these people to live sustainably, you need to give them the right and the privilege to show that to the rest of their community. And so to this day, there are like 10,000 people that go through that Eco Village every year, and they see alternative energy and alternative building construction and alternative septic and permaculture gardens and all of that. And they go back and then they create their own change in their own neighborhoods, in their own homes. So that's what we need to do. We just need to keep doing that, and we need to do it more and faster. And so when I know there's people like you that are out there that are working on this valley, and I know I got grandkids that may one day live in this valley too, then be darned, I'm happy to come out here and talk and share and hopefully inspire people to continue to push for change.
Okay. Yeah, 5 minutes.
So once again, you can reach me with any types of questions or links to things if you want. It's jack@greenplan.ca. It's real simple. That's where you would normally